You might think that if you don't have type 2 diabetes, you don't need to worry about sugar control, but everyone needs to learn about the importance of sugar if you want to look after your brain, your heart, and your metabolic health. Now, over 500 million people in the world suffer with type 2 diabetes. That's approximately 10% of the global population, but it's growing. And millions more, without even realizing it, are at high risk. And we also used to think that type 2 diabetes was a one-way street. You get it, it gets worse over time, you take medications, but now we know it can be improved and even put into remission through key lifestyle changes. So as a doctor, I've seen probably hundreds, thousands of people with type 2 diabetes. And if you know someone who is dealing with prediabetes or yourself, I'm going to give you an insight into exactly what I would say to a patient in clinic if I had 60 minutes to talk about all the diet and lifestyle measures that we have at our disposal. This pod is going to be perfect for sharing with loved ones, family members, but remember, this is not personalized medical advice. I always advise you to speak with your own physician, especially if you're already on medications. But here's the way I approach managing blood sugar levels in order to prevent serious complications and possibly put type 2 diabetes into remission. So what even is type 2 diabetes? Well, essentially it's where your body cannot regulate sugar properly anymore. Well, why do we even have sugar in the body? I thought sugar was, just something you put in cakes and into your tea. Well, sugar or glucose, and I'll be referring to sugar and glucose throughout this podcast interchangeably. They're not exactly the same thing, but for the purposes of this podcast, they will mean the same thing. Is the preferred fuel source of every cell in your body, from brain cells to muscle cells. Your body needs a fuel source and it prefers to use sugar. It converts this into energy in the form of ATP, which powers cells around your body. It powers all these different biological processes around your body. But too much of this fuel can be a bad thing. Now think of it in a very simplistic way, like a house plant. Now, I'm terrible at keeping my house plants alive. I either don't water them enough, so they wilt and they die, or I give them too much water, and that again leads them to wither and die as well. So you have to get the fuel source, in this case for my house plants, at the right level, and it's the same thing for your body as well. Now, this is a very simplistic explanation. Obviously, there's obviously a lot more going on, but the toxicity, and I use that word intentionally here, the toxicity of having too much sugar in your body cannot be overstated. The sugar in your blood is tightly regulated. To put some numbers on this, I just want you to consider the following. So in the total volume of blood pumping around my body right now, at the moment, on average, over 24 hours, I have around 1 teaspoon of sugar in my bloodstream. Just 1 teaspoon of sugar. If I was type 2 diabetic, the average amount of sugar in my total volume of blood around the 24 hours, let's say, would be around 2 teaspoons. So just that perturbation, that very slight perturbation of 1 teaspoon extra average of blood, of sugar in my bloodstream is enough to put me into that diabetic range. We have evolved these very strict, tight mechanisms to regulate sugar in our bloodstream because prolonged exposure to this crucial fuel, it is crucial, is problematic. If sugar hangs around in your bloodstream at high levels for too long, it can cause inflammation, it can lead the blood to become sticky, and it can predispose to narrowing of blood vessels that could cause strokes and heart attacks. It can lead to the creation of something called advanced glycemic end products. This is essentially resting that creates this inflammatory environment. I just want to state that this is over time, this is an average, over years and years, if you were to continue to have these high levels of blood sugar on average, over time, this is where you get this inflammatory picture. It is not a mild perturbation. So if I was to have a piece of cake right now, my blood sugar would shoot up, and I have adapted mechanisms, just like everyone who is otherwise metabolically healthy, to make sure that that sugar goes into cells and it clears away from our bloodstream. But prolonged insults of high sugar, this is where it can lead to the diagnosis of something called type 2 diabetes. That is essentially what is going on. So after a meal, I've just mentioned that I've had a piece of cake here, but let's say after a meal, in an ideal scenario, you want your blood sugar to rise, which, by the way, is completely normal. You should have a blood sugar rise after eating, but you want that rise to be shallow and return to normal quickly. What we don't want is a large rise and a slow return to normal. And the blood tests we do to look at this, typically an oral glucose tolerance test, will demonstrate this in someone who has got type 2 diabetes, whose mechanisms for clearing sugar from the bloodstream is impaired. This is essentially how we diagnose type 2 diabetes. The aim of the game is to essentially ensure that we don't have prolonged exposure to this crucial fuel source in our bloodstream, because unfortunately, if we do get prolonged exposure to sugar, that's where you have those downstream effects that I mentioned earlier, the inflammation, the higher risk of cardiovascular disease, and all the other complications that we know about with regards to type 2 diabetes. Why does it happen in the first place? Well, the reasons why type 2 diabetes occurs is still actually being researched, but we know it's a mix of several factors, including genes. So if you have family members with type 2 diabetes, your risk is higher, but genes only explain a small part of the risk. Lifestyle and environmental factors may actually trigger or influence your genetic predisposition. So if I have a genetic predisposition to type 2 diabetes, which I actually do because I come from an Indian background, then the lifestyle that I enjoy, the lifestyle that I lead, can actually trigger those genetic predispositions. So I might have the genes that put me at high risk, but ultimately it is my lifestyle that will pull the trigger on that genetic predisposition. Aging. So as we get older, our ability to regulate blood sugar often declines, especially if we gain weight, we lose muscle mass, or become less active. As we age, unfortunately, we have a higher likelihood of a number of different conditions, one of which is type 2 diabetes. It's probably most closely related to the fact that we are losing muscle mass, which is a very important store of sugar, as we're going to talk about a little bit later. Another factor is excess body weight. So fat in cells, these lead to inflammation, which impacts the signaling of certain hormones that we'll get to a little bit later. And that can put you at higher risk of type 2 diabetes. And the mainstay of what we're going to be talking about today is lifestyle. Lack of physical activity, not using your muscles enough, and not having a healthy diet. These are things that are going to put you at high risk of type 2 diabetes. And we're going to go into exactly what types of products in your diet could be putting you at high risk, and what types of foods that you should be introducing into your diet to ensure that you're protected as well. And the other thing that perhaps doesn't get as much attention is the environment. So this includes everything from where we live and work to our social relationships and the contamination of food available to us. These all play an important part. And I use that word contamination quite intentionally as well. This broader picture is known as the exposome, and that includes all non-genetic factors driving health and disease, but also the environment and pollution too. Now, this all sounds fine and well, but I often get this question: Dr. Rupy, is there actually any evidence that it's possible to prevent type 2 diabetes if you have the genes, for example, let alone put it into remission? Well, my answer is always this: absolutely. And yes, there is a lot of evidence. So from the perspective of prevention, published in Nutrients in 2019, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis of prevention trials that show lifestyle change can lower the risk of type 2 diabetes by up to 47%. Additionally, in cohort studies, those with the healthiest lifestyle, so those who are able to maintain a healthy body weight, follow a healthy diet, exercise for at least 30 minutes a day, avoiding all the factors that everyone should know about, smoking and alcohol drinking, they had a 75% lower risk of incidence of type 2 diabetes. So there is plenty of evidence out there from multiple different trials about how we can prevent type 2 diabetes. This should not be affecting 10% of the global population. In terms of remission, Well, there's results from the original diabetes remission clinical trial, the direct trial, and they found that almost half, so 46% of participants with type 2 diabetes who received this weight management program essentially achieved remission to a non-diabetic state, and they were off anti-diabetic drugs for at least 2 months without glucose-lowering medication. This is a huge number. So it's absolutely possible to put this condition into remission and keep it in remission if you can stick with a healthy lifestyle and this weight management program, the direct trial. But there are lots of other ways in which you can put it into remission as well. And there's also evidence that just doing some of these things that I'm going to be talking about today, even if you don't put your condition to remission, it can lower the risk of complications of type 2 diabetes. And there are tons of different complications of type 2 diabetes, including increased infection risk, potential amputation, dementia, cardiovascular disease. All these different complications of type 2 diabetes can be mitigated against. You can lower the risk of them. Cohort studies show that among those with this condition, a healthier lifestyle lowers the risk of these different complications, including cancer, death, and of all causes by up to 56%. So even if your numbers don't change, even if we don't put this into remission, you can still lead a healthier lifestyle by adopting some of these lifestyle changes. Guidelines around healthy eating and exercise and all these other things can feel pretty vague. And this is one of my bugbears around this whole idea around lifestyle medicine. So today I'm going to walk you through these lifestyle changes that I think have the biggest impact on type 2 diabetes based on the current evidence. What I'm going to be giving you today is almost like a buffet of prevention and management. Obviously, I want you to have as much as you can from this all-you-can-eat buffet, and I want you to take as much value from what I'm serving up here. But ultimately, it's up to you. And you need to choose what you can build up on slowly so that all of these things can eventually become second nature to you. So try not to, jump in and grab everything on this buffet I'm serving up. Try and choose one, ensure that that's habituated, and then go back to the buffet. The buffet is always open, and you can add a few other things to your plate here. So the first thing I'm going to be talking to you about today is physical activity. You might think that's a bit weird given that this is the doctor's kitchen and I have obviously a bias towards food and nutrition and how we can use that as a powerful lever for lots of different conditions. But physical activity is probably going to have the biggest impact on type 2 diabetes. How does exercise, physical activity, these are terms I'm going to be using interchangeably, improve type 2 diabetes? Well, when we exercise, many downstream effects occur in the body. Even if you don't see immediate changes in weight or fitness levels, it leads to better glucose uptake. So your muscles start pulling sugar or glucose from your blood by moving key transporters. This is actually called a GLUT4 transporter. You don't need to know the names of this, but they bring it to the surface of your cells, which lets them pull in the sugar from your bloodstream without the help of other hormones that drive sugar into the bloodstream. I haven't talked about insulin just yet. I'll talk about that in a second, which is a hormone that's directly responsible for pulling sugar into cells. But even without the use and the help of hormones, exercise encourages your cells to take in sugar from your bloodstream. It's almost like a straw being moved to the surface of a cell, and it sucks in the sugar, sucks in the glucose in from the bloodstream to the cell where it can be utilized for energy or storage. And this boost in sugar uptake and glucose uptake, it doesn't last forever, but it will last anywhere between 3 and 6 hours after the bout of exercise. But you also get longer term benefits as well. So just think about that. Without the use of any hormones, without the use of insulin, which a lot of people understand the use of in late stage type 2 diabetes, where you become reliant on taking insulin from externally and inject it into yourself. Without the use of insulin, exercise can encourage sugar to be taken out of the bloodstream, which is where we measure blood sugar, into the cells where it can be utilized for energy. This is really, really important. I don't want you to forget the benefits of exercise. The other thing is that exercise improves your sensitivity to the hormone insulin, which is responsible for pulling sugar from the bloodstream and driving it into cells. Your cells become more sensitive to this hormone once you've done exercise. What is insulin? Okay, so insulin is a hormone made by the pancreas that's found in the central right side of your abdomen. Just a quick one. If you want to learn the 5 ingredients that I think are fantastic for inflammation that you should be getting into your diet every week, then download this PDF right now. It's in the link down there, and I'll send you my 5 ingredients for inflammation. Okay, so what is insulin? So insulin is a hormone that's made by the pancreas that's found in the central right side of your abdomen that helps your body use or store the sugar from the food that you eat. So when you eat and your blood sugar rises, insulin is released from the pancreas and it acts like a key, sort of unlocking the door to different cells in the body so they can absorb the sugar from your bloodstream and use it for energy. The key cells for sugar utilization are fat cells, muscle cells, and your liver cells as well. There's too much sugar, insulin can encourage that liver to even store it in the form of glycogen that use it for later. It sort of packs it away like a suitcase for a rainy day. When we exercise, our cells become more sensitive, i.e. more responsive to this hormone insulin. So essentially what happens is we need less insulin to have the same desired effect of moving sugar out of the bloodstream. And this insulin sensitizing effect, as it's referred to in the literature, can stick around for up to 48 hours, depending on how intense the workout was and what you eat and how well you slept and other factors like that. But this phenomena of improving your responsiveness to the hormone insulin is brilliant. This is one of the reasons why I feel exercise is sort of the under-talked about. It's underutilized as a tool in this fight against type 2 diabetes and better management of type 2 diabetes as well. The other thing about insulin is, let's say you didn't do anything, you didn't do any exercise whatsoever, and you just relied on your pancreas to produce insulin and drive that into your cells. What happens is your cells become used to insulin just rocking up at the door and letting in sugar in. And so what happens is you start to ignore insulin as a hormone. You're like, this insulin guy just keeps on turning up. We'll just ignore him for a while. And so more and more insulin needs to show up at the door to have the same desired effect. This is referred to as insulin resistance. So you need to have more insulin released from the pancreas to have the same desired effect. And you might not think that's a bad thing, but more insulin actually has other unintended effects. It's known as an anabolic hormone. It can actually cause weight gain as well. And so you have this derangement of all these other metabolic markers of health. So you don't want too much insulin. You want the right amount of insulin being released. So if you can get away with having the minimum dose of insulin by exercise and all these other things that I'm going to talk about later, that's going to put you in a better stead. That's going to put you in a better position metabolically as well. So we talked about how it drives sugar into the cells. We talked about how it improves your sensitivity to insulin. The other thing that exercise does is lower inflammation. Exercise lowers pro-inflammatory molecules and increases anti-inflammatory molecules, also called exocrines. These are sort of like signaling molecules that help improve glucose control. And the aim of the game is to try and reduce inflammation. I've talked about inflammation on other podcasts before. It is not necessarily, quote unquote, a bad thing. Insulin is a very important process that our body relies on to fight infections, to signal, etc. But the imbalance of inflammation is something that is underpinning a lot of conditions of the modern era. Hypertension, dementia, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, they all have insulin at the foundational level that drives that condition. So if there's anything that we can do to readdress that balance through food and exercise, this is something we should be leaning into. And exercise is a powerful inflammation lowering activity. It is a powerful lever to pull that reduces inflammation, that can improve your body's ability to tolerate sugar. The other thing that exercise does, kind of goes without explaining, is it lowers the fat stored around vital organs, so it can increase the amount of fats that you burn off as energy, and the fat that you store around vital organs, which is sort of like the last place that you would want to store fat. So when I say vital organs, I'm talking about in your liver, around the pancreas. You don't want fat there. This is the metabolically active fat. This is the worst type of fat you want. Exercise, even independent of weight change, can lower the fat stored around those organs. And the fat stored around those organs can also impair insulin signaling that can lead to insulin resistance. So if you can exercise, you'll reduce the fat that's coating these vital organs. It will improve your sugar regulation abilities. There are many more beneficial effects of exercise, like improved pancreatic cell function that actually releases insulin, vascular function, muscle strength, bone health, memory, stress, anxiety. We're not going to talk about that today. Lots of other impacts of exercise. Just remember those things that I talked to you about with regards to sugar regulation specifically. This is why you should be a big fan of exercise. Human evidence, Rupy, what's the human evidence that we have around exercise and improving sugar control? Gosh, there's just so much. These effects are seen in multiple clinical trials. Improved blood glucose control, including lowering an average marker we have of your sugar levels over the preceding 3 months. It's something called hemoglobin A1C. It's something that's used in diagnostically as well as management. So to monitor how well your sugar control has been over the preceding time period. And exercise can lower your average glucose levels over the preceding 3 months. It can improve insulin resistance, as I've explained. It can improve waist circumference. It can lower your blood pressure, can lower your cholesterol levels. It is uniquely beneficial for us. But here's where we go into the detail, because it's very easy for me to just say, exercise is great, everyone should exercise. Specifically, what should we be doing for type 2 diabetes? Well, each form of exercise has advantages to your muscle health, your mitochondrial health. So mitochondria, these sort of powerhouses of every cell, they do a lot more than just energy production, but this is how I'm going to explain it to you today. So the best approach is to mix up your exercise routine, because all different types of exercise have benefits to all these different areas. And broadly, we can categorize them into aerobic or cardio, resistance training or weight training, and high intensity interval training. There's also flexibility and balance exercises, but these are the 3 buckets that I think probably have the most bang for your buck. High intensity exercise, resistance or weight training, and aerobic or cardio training. So we'll start with aerobic, because I think it's sort of fallen out of fashion, and I think it's very, very important for folks especially with established type 2 diabetes. Aerobic exercise includes things like walking, jogging, cycling, swimming, aquatic activities, dancing. All these different things are aerobic or cardiovascular activity. I'll get to the crux of what you need to do. You need to aim for 2.5 to 5 hours of moderate cardio aerobic activity each week. Spread this out over several days. I'll talk to you about why that's important. But 2.5 to 5 hours every week is the sweet spot. If you can do more, great. As long as you're not overtraining, that's fine. But you want to be looking at a minimum of that across the week. This is something you really should aim for. Most of us do not get to this level of activity without really putting some effort into organizing your time over a 7-day period. The way I advise people to look at this is 30 minutes every single day of a brisk walk, cycling, jogging, rowing, whatever it is that gets your heart rate up and putting a little bit of sweat on. You want to be doing that every single day, at least 5 days of 30 minutes. You don't want 2 consecutive days without exercise, because you have this insulin sensitizing effect for 48 hours afterwards. So you want to make sure that you're pulsing it regularly throughout the week. This is essentially a dose of medicine that you want to take regularly. If you look at exercise through the lens of it being like a pill, like something that you want to make sure you're getting a regular dose of, this is why you want to have it on most days, and make sure that you do not go 2 consecutive days without taking your exercise drug, without taking your exercise pill. I explained to you a little bit earlier through the mechanisms as to why exercise has this impact on blood sugar regulations, because it sensitizes your cells to insulin better. So instead of being a weekend warrior and doing all your exercise on Saturday and Sunday, like some people do, just to fit around their schedule, so I understand why that becomes intuitive to think like that. But now you see exercise through the lens of taking a regular pill. You want to make sure you're doing it throughout the week. Ideally, if you can do it Monday to Sunday, as long as you're not overexerting yourself, that is wonderful. But at least 5 days a week, and ensuring that you're not going 2 consecutive days without taking your exercise medication. If someone is completely untrained, so I want to be sensitive to the fact that not everyone is going to be used to going to the gym or doing regular exercise at home. You definitely do not need to go to the gym. I should say that at the start, actually, you do not need to go to the gym to exercise. But if someone is completely untrained, walking is usually the first thing I recommend. Just doing a brisk walk, or as fast as you can tolerate, every single day, and getting yourself into the mindset of someone who exercises daily. So that's aerobic or cardiovascular training. There's lots of benefits to your mitochondrial health and your muscle health. It stresses your muscles in a different way to the other thing that I recommend, which is resistance or weight training. So this is using free weights or machines, but it also includes things like elastic bands or your own body weight, and even, everyday items that you have at home, a backpack filled with books, bags of rice, water bottles. These are all things that I've actually used personally, either at home or when I'm traveling, to ensure that I'm still doing some resistance training. Now, what resistance training does is it improves muscle strength, it improves bone density, and it improves insulin sensitivity as well. And you want to be aiming for a dose of 2 to 3 days a week, doing 10 to 15 repetitions of each exercise for 1 to 3 sets. Now, these exercises should be focusing on your major muscle groups. So things like squats and lunges for your lower legs, chair dips for your back, and standing calf raises as well for the back of the legs, your calves, so major muscle sets as well. These are the big muscle groups. And the reason why I'm focusing on the big muscle groups is because your muscles are big sinks for sugar. You store sugar around your body, in your liver and your fat cells, but also in your muscle cells as well. So it stands to reason that the healthier your muscles and the more muscle bulk that you can take, you don't need to be a bodybuilder, you don't need to purposely put on muscle, but the more muscle material you have in your body, the better your metabolic health. The more area, the more storage you have, essentially, if you want to think about it like that you have to keep sugar onto your body without it being in your bloodstream. The aim of the game is to keep the sugar out of the bloodstream and ensure that it's appropriately packaged in different areas of your body. And your muscle groups, the major muscle groups, are a big area of storage for your sugar as well. So ensure that you're doing resistance training. I just want to repeat this, 2 to 3 days every single week. Do a collection of different muscle groups, but do not forget your major muscle groups, your legs and your back. The third exercise type is HIIT training, high intensity interval training. Now, this has been popularized by a number of PTs and physios online, including Joe Wicks, famously in the UK. I love this type of training because not only does it have these unique metabolic benefits, but it also is really time efficient for folks who are time poor, someone like myself, for example. And it involves doing short bursts of intense exercise, so anywhere between 10 to 4 minutes. So there is a Norwegian, I believe, a training regime where it's 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, which is really, really intense. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got Tabata, which is 10 to 20 seconds on and then 10 seconds off. But it's these alternating bursts of intense exercise up to 85-90% of your maximum output with brief periods of rest and then repeating as well. and doing that multiple times. Like I said, it's time efficient. It really does improve your cardiorespiratory fitness, but it also stresses your muscles in a way that is uniquely beneficial for their metabolic capacity. So it improves your sugar regulation capacity. One way in which you can do this is at home, particularly if you're untrained, is climbing stairs vigorously for 45 seconds and then taking a 2-minute break and then going back in again. You can also do things like jumps or burpees for a minute. There are lots of ways in which you can alternate the exercise intensity and then the resting period as well. This is a training, a type of training that I feel, whilst it's popular and whilst it is time efficient, you want to be quite careful of, particularly if you are untrained. So if you're untrained, you start doing these exercises straight off the bat, you're probably going to injure yourself because your muscles need to be resilient and supple to ensure that you're doing this sort of training and not putting yourself at risk. And that's the main thing that you want to be careful of with exercise. You want to stay in the game for as long as possible, and you want to minimize risks that can take you out of doing exercise. That's probably the most dangerous thing, not doing any exercise whatsoever. This kind of high intensity interval training is something that I would recommend only doing once or twice a week. This isn't something that I would suggest doing 5 or 6 times a week, because what happens is it's quite a big stressor to your muscles, and you want to ensure that you're not overexerting your muscles in that way. So I would mix this in with resistance training and cardiovascular training, but this would only be once or maximum twice a week that I would suggest doing this for. Again, this could be a way of just getting people who are time poor to get into exercise, and it's part of an identity piece that I'll talk about in a second, but certainly something that I would recommend not overdoing, just for the risk of exercise as well, of injury as well. I mentioned flexibility and balance exercises. You might not think that yoga and stretching and qigong, tai chi, these gentle movements, that are essentially a lot more around muscle suppleness would do anything for sugar. But there is actually evidence that tai chi in particular may lower blood glucose and HbA1c levels. Again, there are many videos online for Qigong and yoga, Tai Chi, and I think this is a very good entry point for folks who are not untrained, who haven't done any exercise and they don't really know where to start. Tons of videos online just to get yourself moving and get yourself into the habit of doing something every single day. On the subject of habit, if you're sitting for more than 8 hours a day, make sure you stand up and take 3-minute quick walks or 3 minutes to do a couple of lunges or squats. No one's going to look at you funny, I promise, because you are looking after your metabolic health. You want to make sure that you're not sitting for long periods. We are designed to constantly move around. We are designed to be bipedal, on our feet, walking for long stretches of kilometers and miles. Like, you have to keep your body moving. It is very unnatural for me, for example, to be sat here on a chair for hours at a time. So make sure that you're leaning into this idea of movement snacking, making sure that you're getting up every hours during waking hours, obviously. Okay, so the ideal program for exercise, I told you I wanted to keep this as actionable as possible, is to combine cardiovascular and strength training each week. Is to make sure that you're moving regularly and particularly after meals, and it's to really lean into this self-identity piece as well. So if I was in front of someone and they were like, okay, I get it, you convinced me exercise is something I should be doing every single day to improve my blood sugar regulation, to either prevent type 2 diabetes or better manage my type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, what should I be doing? You want to combine your cardiovascular and strength training each week. This is where you do your 30 to 60 minutes of cardiovascular training every single day, brisk walking, swimming, tennis, CrossFit, whatever it might, rowing, cycling. That, make sure you got that dialed in. Strength training 2 to 3 times a day. So, and if you are unfamiliar with how to strength train, I would highly recommend you get a coach or a PT to give you at least the exercises and correct your form to make sure that you are challenging your muscles in the correct way, because you want to minimize injury. Couple that with one training day, which is just purely dedicated to high intensity interval training. So that's 5 to 7 days of cardiovascular training, plus 2 to 3 sessions of your resistance training, plus 1 training day of HIIT training as well. This is your perfect buffet of exercise. You don't need to do everything at the same time. Even if you start off with just 1 walk a week, that is great, because that is going to put you on the path to getting to those levels of exercise that you want to be doing to best maintain your blood sugar levels and improve the management or prevention of type 2 diabetes. Moving after meals. So instead of sitting after eating, take a short walk or do light activities around your home. It forces the sugar from your bloodstream into muscles where they can utilize it. It's like taking a dose of medicine after your meal to better encourage the sugar from your bloodstream to go into cells where it can be utilized. It's very well known that this is a good way of stabilizing blood sugar levels, and it's something that I do recommend for type 2 diabetic patients as well. And the third piece is that self-identity piece. Just like brushing your teeth, we all brush our teeth every single day. We don't, have to tell everyone about it. We just do it because this is something that over time feels natural and an essential part of your day. You want to feel like that with exercise. It is essentially something that you just do. So whether that means that you start squatting whilst you're doing your teeth, or you start doing lunges whilst you're making your coffee, you've got to lean into that self-identity piece as someone who exercises every single day. I do not start my day, I don't leave my house without doing some form of stretch or some form of exercise. This is just something that has become so natural to me. And if I didn't, and I left my house without moving, I would feel the same way I would if I hadn't brushed my teeth. That is literally how I would feel. And you can do that as well. It just takes that small switch in your brain to identify someone who exercises. That is exercise. This is the reason why I'm such a big fan of it. All right, let's talk about diet. Let's talk about eating for better blood sugar. Diet has a big impact. Many studies show that eating more whole plant-based foods can improve glucose control, can improve your hemoglobin 1AC, can improve insulin sensitivity, and help lower the use of medications. For example, a 6-month study showed that a group-based nutrition and lifestyle intervention program focused on eating more unprocessed whole foods lowered these markers of metabolic health, lowered their use of glucose-lowering medication, and at 6 months, 49% of the participants had reduced their medication or eliminated it completely, just after 6 months. In another study, a meta-analysis of 9 randomized controlled trials published by Nature involving over 1,000 patients that used the Mediterranean diet, they found that it lowered their average levels of glucose significantly, improved their body weight, and improved their cardiovascular risk factors compared to the controlled diet. Mediterranean diet, fantastic. In another study, a systematic review of 52 studies, they found that diets high in plant protein, such as the low-carbohydrate Mediterranean diet, was effective in achieving diabetes remission, particularly when accompanied by weight loss as well. So this is absolutely possible. That last study was from 2024. This is absolutely possible, and everyone should be aware of this, and I don't think many people are. There's lots of diet tribes out there. There's lots of people saying you should do, low carb, you should do vegan only, you should do keto. But I'm going to talk initially about what every diet tribe will absolutely agree with. The first thing is swapping out ultra-processed foods. And I'm a big believer that actually, if this is the only thing you did, this is the only thing that you could actually lean into without counting calories or macros or doing anything funky with your diet, this probably is going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. This is going to probably be the biggest lever that you can pull, just getting rid of ultra-processed foods. These are foods that have undergone heavy industrial processing that tend to have lots of added sugar to them, artificial colors, stabilizers, emulsifiers, and other additives, looking back to our description of the exposome, other additives that could be obesogenic and promoting of type 2 diabetes as well. We know that those who have more processed foods in their diet are a high risk of type 2 diabetes. There was a large cohort study that found that participants with a higher intake of various foods with high amounts of additives and emulsifiers are more likely to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes during follow-up. They're more likely to have more weight gain. Human trials show a robust causal relationship between ultra-processed diets and increased energy intake and weight gain. For example, there was actually one trial that found that people who consumed ultra-processed foods took in an extra 500 calories in a day compared to an unprocessed diet. Now, this sort of is really easy for people to understand. If you've ever had crisps, Pringles, chips, whatever it might be, it is so easy to overconsume them because they don't have fiber. They don't have any nutrients in. Your body doesn't recognize anything that you've actually given to it. And so your body's always like, well, just feed me some more, feed me some more. This is really easy for people to understand. For anyone that's had any junk food whatsoever, it is easy to overconsume. And we know that if you overconsume, you're going to be taking in more sugar, you're going to be taking more energy, and your body's going to have to process that. And unfortunately, that can lead to, over time, that can lead to a higher risk of type 2 diabetes. And that's without even talking about the other negative health effects of ultra-processed food, including higher risks of heart disease, mental health disorders, something that does not get enough airtime, obesity, and dying from any cause, according to a recent meta-analysis that was published in the BMJ in 2024. Hidden ultra-processed foods is something that we also need to be aware of as well. They make up a huge chunk of our daily intake, up to 42% in Australia and over 56% in the UK. And unfortunately, a lot of that is in healthy, quote-unquote, healthy food as well. So lots of healthy foods that have high fiber on, or pictures of farms and nuts and seeds on the front, are actually classified as ultra-processed foods, and we are consuming them in droves. And unfortunately, that is not going to be beneficial to us. In fact, it's going to be at the detriment of our sugar regulating capabilities. The top one, though, is processed meat, in my opinion. So things like bacon, ham, sausages, dried meat. What these contain are high amounts of nitrate or nitrite additives. And what these can do is increase the production of these advanced glycation end products. I've mentioned them a couple of times now. I should really clarify what I mean. They're abbreviated to AGEs, and they essentially create inflammation by banging into red blood cells. They cause stickiness. They cause excess inflammation. They can increase oxidative stress and potentially even lead to insulin resistance as well. In addition to putting you at higher risk of cardiovascular disease and the narrowing of arteries as well. Research from the University of Cambridge involving 2 million people found that eating just 50 grams of processed meat every single day, a couple of slices of ham, for example, could raise the risk of type 2 diabetes by 15%. And that's just a couple of slices of ham. And most people are not just having a couple of slices of ham, unfortunately. It's a lot more than that. And it sneaks in to everything from bacon butties to rolls to pasties. You know, most of what you see in train stations, unfortunately, is just a platter of processed meats. And it's estimated that reducing processed meats by just 30% can prevent 350,000 type 2 diabetes cases in the US alone, which is just phenomenal. So this is something that really, really should be addressed. So that's processed meats. That's one of the main culprits of ultra-processed foods. Other elements are refined grains. So pastas, flours, breads. Unfortunately, most breads in supermarkets are ultra processed. Polished grains like white rice, for example, that are added to multiple different products. I'm not saying that you never have these again, but these are certainly not great from the perspective of sugar balance. Sugary drinks, this sort of goes without saying, but even fruit juice, sweetened lemonades, energy drinks, I would classify them in the same bucket as your ultra-processed drinks, your sugar-sweetened beverages. Now, whilst fruit juices definitely do contain things like polyphenols and other beneficial elements, the fact that they are refined to remove the fiber can have a detrimental impact when consumed in excess or daily to our ability to regulate sugar, and puts at a higher risk of type 2 diabetes as well. If you're drinking a lot of sugar in liquid form, it is absolutely linked to type 2 diabetes, whether that's a fruit juice or sugar-sweetened beverages. And unlike sugar-containing solid foods, liquid sugars have an extra impact. They disrupt hunger and fullness cues, and they make it harder to regulate your appetite, which makes it harder to regulate how much energy you consume in a 24-hour period as well. And another thing that I have a bugbear of are ready-made meals and meal deals and packaged snacks, instant soups, vegan meat or faux meat, breakfast cereals, cereal bars. These are all ultra-processed foods. If you were to just remove these, like I said at the start, I believe we could go a long way in improving people's blood sugar regulating capabilities and preventing things like type 2 diabetes. How do you spot them? Look at the ingredients list. Beware of instant and ready-made options, and watch out for those health buzzwords, labels like low-fat, sugar-free, diet. These are things that should always raise a red flag. I'm not saying that every single product with these labels is ultra-processed, but it is a big indication, or it's definitely an indicator to me that something's going on with that product and something's funny about it. And if I was to remove all of these from your diet, if I was to come into your kitchen, let's say, or go to your workplace, or be your guide as you commute to work, and I was to protect you from all these different incursions into your diet, that could simply be enough. And I don't mean to say that lightly. I honestly think if I was to remove all those ultra-processed foods from your diet, if I was to effectively be your spokesperson for what goes onto your plate and ensuring that everything was unprocessed and whole, that could simply be enough to improve your body's innate ability to protect against high sugar, to protect against metabolic disease, to protect you against type 2 diabetes. In the realm of diet, I often get asked this: which carbs are best for type 2 diabetes, and should I be removing all carbs from my diet? Now, I think carbs are lumped in very closely to ultra-processed foods. When people think of carbs, they think of breads and pastas and refined grains, which are processed foods. So it goes into that category. It doesn't necessarily mean that the whole foods, the beans, the lentils, the root vegetables like parsnips and swede and sweet potato, these are all still carbs, but these are not the ultra-processed carbs. And I believe that you should be eating these types of carbs because anything high fiber is great. So steer clear of the refined grains and the breads and the pastas and the flours, but do lean into the other carbohydrate foods that are high in fiber because they are packaged in nature's perfect form. These are things that we should be consuming, not in excess and not at the expense of other macronutrients in our diet, but certainly something that we shouldn't be scared of, even if you do have an established condition as well. There are some suggestions that we should be removing these completely because of the GI index and the GL indices. So what is the glycemic index, the GI, and the glycemic load, which is the GL? Well, these are two measures that help people understand how foods that have carbohydrates in them or are largely carbohydrates affect blood sugar levels. The glycemic index, or the GI, is a ranking system that measures foods based on how quickly they raise your blood sugar. So foods are scored from 0 to 100, with high GI foods being higher. So these are like white bread or pure sugar. These cause a rapid increase, whilst the low GI foods, so anything between 0 and 50, let's say, things like lentils, these cause a slower rise. So choosing more low GI foods can actually help maintain stable blood sugar. And glycemic load takes into account both the GI index, but also the amount of carbs in a typical serving of food. So it provides a bit more of a complete picture of how a food's actual impact on blood sugar could affect you. And putting some examples onto this, like I said, high GI food would be something like white bread or refined cereals. A low GI food would be green vegetables, most fruits, raw carrots, kidney beans, chickpeas, lentils. Medium GI would be things like sweet corn, bananas, pineapple, raisins. And this is where I actually think that the measuring system kind of falls down, because this is just one element of food that we're looking at, and it doesn't give you an indication of the other health benefits of said food. I wouldn't want people to steer clear of sweet corn, for example, because of the fact that it is a medium GI food, when actually there are lots of benefits of sweet corn in the diet. And actually when you combine these foods, it can have an impact on the overall sugar levels that you experience after consuming them. So the GI index doesn't really take into account the combination of foods that you put onto your plate as well, which is going to have an ultimate impact on your blood sugar levels. So just be careful about leaning too much into the GI index, but it is something I get asked about a lot, so I thought I'd bring it up here as well. So don't be scared of carbs, but if you are interested in going for lower GI carbs, then beans, legumes, those sorts of things are useful for type 2 diabetics and people who are pre-diabetes and looking after their sugar levels as well. Why should you eat more plant foods for type 2 diabetes? Well, the current evidence points towards eating more whole plant foods, particularly high in plant protein. So reducing animal protein and actually eating more plant-based protein. You don't need to go completely vegan or vegetarian, but it has been shown to lower diabetes risk because of things like saturated fat. So high saturated fat diets can increase the risk of type 2 diabetes, potentially by interfering with insulin signaling. The other sort of Occam's razor approach, so the simplistic explanation as to why plant proteins and higher amounts of plants in the diet can improve type 2 diabetes, is that it's far easier to overeat calories and energy if you have meat and animal-based products in your diet. If you're focusing more on plants, it's very hard to overconsume in the form of calories. And calories, whilst I'm not a big fan of calorie counting, overall, it will have an impact on your risk of type 2 diabetes. So if you overconsume calories, it can put you at higher risk as well, because you have to do something with the sugar everything gets converted into sugar essentially. You have to do something in your body. So if you're overconsuming energy, then it can lead to a higher risk of type 2 diabetes. So having more plant protein in the diet, reducing animal protein is a really easy hack of ensuring that you're in energy balance, but also reducing saturated fats that can increase the risks as well. They also tend to have a lot more fiber. Now, fiber, apart from improving digestion, will improve the population of gut microbes in your body. Your gut microbiota is central to regulating sugar as well, and glucose control, as well as body weight, as well as your cholesterol levels, as well as inflammation. Your microbes thrive on different types of fiber. So ensuring that you're getting a good collection of different fibers that you can get on a more unprocessed, whole food, plant-focused diet, the better for your metabolic health. So always think about fiber and always think about your food through the lens of how you're feeding your microbes as well. With the increased amount of plants in your diet, and hopefully you're getting variety as well, you're going to be getting more things like polyphenols into your diet. So polyphenols are these wonderful plant chemicals that we find in not just colorful foods, but also beige foods as well, like onions and mushrooms. These all have different types of plant chemicals in, and they can increase your antioxidant defenses. They can lower inflammation. They can improve your gut microbiota. They can improve the signaling of your insulin levels. They can improve the sensitivity of your cells to insulin levels as well. So don't sleep on polyphenols and don't sleep on the benefits of having a plant predominant diet because of all these extra benefits that you get from those as well. There is also an argument for more unsaturated fats in your diet, including linoleic acid and oleic acid. These you can get from things like extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds. These are great for you. But there's been a lot of fat shaming for the previous 30, 40 years, and we haven't had as much of a nuanced conversation around the good quality fats that we should be having in our diet that could actually improve our sensitivities for hormone insulin and improve our blood sugar regulation as well. When you replace saturated fats like butter, for example, or the type of fats you find in meat products with unsaturated fats isocalorically, so the same amounts in terms of calories, you improve your body's ability to regulate sugar as well. So lean into unsaturated fats. I'm not saying that you never have butter or you never have some sort of meats. You can tolerate small amounts of these foods in your diet, but you want to be leaning more into the plant-based spectrum of foods. So in the spirit of making this as actionable as possible, these are the key foods that I would suggest for folks with type 2 diabetes. They're minimally processed, they keep their whole intact form, they're packed with nutrients, fiber, antioxidants, and they are great for better blood sugar control. Legumes. So beans, lentils, peas, try and go for around 2 servings a day. They provide essential plant protein and fiber that help with blood sugar control and they keep you feeling full. colorful vegetables. I tend to go for 3 portions per meal. So go for any seasonal vegetables, roast them, toss them into your meals, and 3 portions per meal, which is around 80 grams per ingredient per meal, is something that seems quite hard to get. But if you look at most of the Doctor's Kitchen recipes in cookbooks or even on our app, you will see that we are purposely ensuring that you have at least 80 grams of each key vegetable. So whether that's onion, the mushrooms we use, the certain beans and that kind of stuff, we're always getting 3 portions of vegetables in your meals as well, particularly greens as well, which is the next thing. Leafy greens. I try and go for at least a serving with every meal, but 2 servings a day. Think spinach, Swiss chard, kale, collards, beet greens, bok choy, broccoli, obviously. These are all sources of things like potassium, vitamin K, fiber, carotenoids, lutein. These all have strong antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties that could be beneficial for blood sugar control as well. And in terms of whole grains, this is probably the most controversial area from the diet tribe point of view. I'm a big fan of whole grains, but proper whole grains. So things like quinoa, quinoa is a pseudo grain, barley, buckwheat, wild rice. As long as we are not over consuming these products, they belong in our pantries. Teff, amaranth, freekeh. If you want to go for higher protein grains than things like teff, which is something that might be hard to source, but you can definitely find it online. It's probably one of the highest protein grains that are out there. Amaranth and quinoa, which is a pseudo grain. These are the high protein whole grains that are also high fiber. And I am a fan of brown rice as long as we're not over consuming them. The way I see these products is that I wouldn't recommend more than 75 gram serving per person of any of these whole grains cooked. Some people go for less than that, 50 grams. That means over a 24-hour period, you're not having more than 100 to 150 grams of any of these whole grain products, which is fine as long as you're having enough of the other vegetables and other leafy greens as well. Seeds and nuts, so 2 to 3 tablespoons a day. Sprinkle flax or pumpkin seeds, chia, as long as they're soaked, on yogurts and salads, and nuts a handful a day. These have been shown to improve type 2 diabetes as well and even prevent it, perhaps from the unsaturated fatty acids and the fact that you are competing out the other saturated fats as well. These are the foods that form the mainstay of my diet personally as someone who's interested in blood sugar control and making sure that I, as someone who has a higher risk of insulin resistance, can prevent it for as long as possible and hopefully never have to suffer with type 2 diabetes. The other element, which is perhaps the one with less evidence, are fermented foods. Yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut. The dose of these is sort of uncertain. We're looking at the academic literature, but certainly a handful or a couple, 3 tablespoons of these products every single day would be something I would say is a minimum. They contain live microorganisms which help improve the diversity of your gut microbiota and lower inflammation. And in some trials on people with type 2 diabetes and prediabetes, eating fermented foods improved their glucose control, including fasting blood glucose. So that's where your sugar level is determined when you have not consumed any food whatsoever, and also measures of something of HOMA-IR, which is a measure of insulin resistance as well. And obviously get your herbs and spices in too, because of the wealth of benefits that those have to not only flavor, but also functional benefits to foods as well. As a daily minimum, you've probably heard me say this before, is get your BBGs in. That's your beans, berries, greens, and seeds. Every single day, you want to be making sure that you're ticking off, have I had my beans? Have I had my berries, frozen or fresh? Have I had my greens? Have I had my seeds and nuts? Get those into your daily diet. It will be satiating. It will ensure that you're getting enough fiber, and it will ensure that you're getting your good dose of anti-inflammatory products that could help with blood sugar regulation too. This is your key playbook. This is your cheat sheet for the foods that you should be consuming to improve blood sugar control. And I get asked this question a lot as well, why low carb works. Now, the reason why low carb or any diet works is probably primarily, number one, the first thing I said in this diet section. It removes ultra-processed foods. That's why most diets, whether you want to go on Ducken or 5-2 or vegan or vegetarian, the common denominator across all these diets is that they remove ultra-processed foods. The other reason why low carb is a strategy that has gained popularity for people with type 2 diabetes works is because it's easy to not overconsume calories. It removes a lot of those processed foods. It's very simple to follow, and it ensures that you're not going to be consuming too many calories. And it's a very simple, straightforward method for folks, which is why I'm actually a fan if you want to go low carb, as long as you're not over-consuming high saturated foods, which is often given the green light across some of these low carbing strategies. So bacon and fatty streaks of meat. In the short term, you might not see the damaging effects of long-term consumption of these different products. Long-term consumption of high saturated fat products would not be advisable, in my opinion, because of the inflammatory effects, because of the ultimate impact on insulin signaling as well. So you might actually be prolonging type 2 diabetes or just pushing it further into the future. And obviously the impact on cardiovascular health as well. I cannot be understated. I honestly think a plant predominant approach is better, as long as you're not under consuming protein. And it doesn't necessarily need to be vegan or vegetarian, but it just needs to be inclusive of animal products, but in appropriate doses. So a judicial amount of animal-based protein is not something that is a daily staple, and is certainly not high saturated fat versions of those as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about not only what to eat, but when to eat. And eating an earlier dinner as a strategy is something that I advise everyone to do, actually. There is some evidence in patients with metabolic syndrome that intermittent fasting can improve body weight, glucose metabolism, blood pressure, insulin sensitivity, cholesterol levels. It seems like every month there is a new paper bestowing the virtues of some form of fasting. But which form of fasting is best? Well, I think fasting itself is a very vague term, and the common fasting methods that you will see out there sort of bundle this all together. There's time-restricted eating, which is where I'm going to put most of my focus in. There is twice per week fasting, so something like a 5-2 diet, which is where you underconsume calories drastically for 2 days, and then you eat within a normal calorie balance for 5 days. And then you also have alternate fasting or water fasting, which is where you completely remove all food and you just have water for a number of days, whether that's 24 hours, 72 hours, and beyond as well. I think time-restricted eating, which is not changing the amount of energy that you consume, but just when you consume that energy, is probably the best, most pragmatic strategy for people. And it involves only eating within this set frame each day, like 8 hours, and fasting for the remaining number of hours, in which case that would be 16 hours. And that has been shown to improve blood sugar levels, insulin resistance, independent of any change in any calorie consumption, and in people with type 2 diabetes as well. There's also, within this strategy that we'll talk about in a second, there's the early versus late eating window. So a cross-sectional and experimental studies have shown the benefits of consuming meals earlier in the day rather than in the evening for glucose levels. And the reason why is because your body is more attuned and better ready to absorb calories in the form of food earlier in the day versus later in the day. And so this is a sort of a win or a green light for an earlier dinner. There's lots of potential mechanisms for how fasting works. Everything from autophagy to giving your gut a rest to increasing nutrient sensing. There's lots of mechanisms that have been proposed, but the elephant in the room is that it just helps you consume less calories. And consuming less calories has been shown to prevent and even reverse diabetes independent of diet quality as well. Now, I'm obviously not a fan of just reducing calories like I've mentioned earlier, but it is the elephant in the room, and that's basically how fasting would work. So here's what I would do. I would adopt a time-restricted eating method. So it's where you start eating, let's say at 8 a.m. or whenever is most appropriate for you to have your breakfast. You would keep that eating window open for 8, 10, or 12 hours, depending on where you want to start. And I would close that eating window early, so at least 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. So if your normal bedtime is, let's say, 10 p.m., you want to make sure you're closing that eating window by 7 p.m. This is essentially a time-restricted eating window. There was lots of debate about how long a window should be to have the maximum benefits. And the honest answer is no one really knows, because there is so much variation in different individuals and different people. And really what you want to know is that this is applicable in the real world to you. So if you can start your eating window at 8 a.m. and close it a couple of hours before bed, you're probably going to be getting at least a 10 or a 12-hour eating window. And that is good enough, because most people, over 50% of people, eat across a 12-hour plus period. They're eating for most of the day, 16 hours plus per day, because we tend to just eat out of boredom. And when we do eat out of boredom, we tend to crave, overconsume the high calorific, snacky-like foods as well. This is where I think time-restricted eating can actually have a positive impact as well. Are there any risks? Well, fasting in this method is generally safe. You might feel hungry or irritable at first in hours where you're restricting yourself from eating. Those symptoms usually go away after a couple of weeks and your body just gets used to it. But it's really important that if you're on medication for type 2 diabetes, you do speak to your healthcare provider before starting any fasting regime, particularly anything that's 5-2 or alternate day fasting, where you can completely remove all food, because that can definitely impact how your medication work and even put you at higher risk of low blood glucose as well, which you definitely want to avoid. So please make sure that if you are on medication, you do speak to your own physician about that. My recommendation: start slow, set a dinner time and stick to it, set an eating window and stick to that, stay hydrated and monitor your body. Pay attention to how you feel during a time-restricted eating method. If you experience any dizziness or weakness or unusual symptoms, do consult your doctor about that as well. The third area, so we've talked about exercise, we've talked about diet. Even if those are the only things that you do, that is going to be good enough. But this is the buffet of all the different options that you have within lifestyle that I think people should know about. And sleep is a very, very important mechanism that we can have some control over. That's up for debate, but we definitely have some control over sleep quality. And we know that the quality of your sleep has an impact on blood sugar regulation, both very short, so that is 5 to 6 hours and under, and very long, that's anything over 9 hours. These sleep durations, both of those at either end of the extreme, have been linked to higher risks of type 2 diabetes, poor glucose control, more cravings, higher appetite. And this can lead to hormonal changes, higher amounts of inflammation, circadian rhythm disruption, and a high impaired control of blood sugar in patients with type 2 diabetes as well. What is going on? So if you are underslept, let's say, it can lead to reduced insulin sensitivity. Now, everything that we've been talking about so far has all been geared towards ensuring that your cells are responsive to appropriate doses of insulin that's released by your pancreas. And what happens is your cells become less sensitive to insulin, which means you need to pump up more insulin to have the same desired effect of clearing sugar from your bloodstream and putting it into your cells. There are also, this is very important, there are also changes in leptin and ghrelin. These are your hunger hormones. And what this does is it leads to increased hunger and appetite. You are hungrier and you're more likely to snack and overconsume calories if you are sleep deprived. That is the simplistic explanation as to why you are at higher risk of type 2 diabetes, because you are overconsuming calories. But there are also some mechanisms that actually impair your body's natural ability, your body's ability to regulate sugar appropriately. I'm actually having a personal experience of this right now. I've never been more sleep deprived at the moment, because I have a 4-week-old and he's keeping me up at night. And this is someone who has experienced medicine for many years. I've done on-calls, I've done night shifts for stretches of time, and I've never been hungrier than I am right now, because if I'm in the kitchen and there's chocolate or biscuits, I'm ravenously going through all this stuff. And I know exactly why. It's because my hunger hormones are completely out of whack. My leptin and ghrelin completely out of whack, and it is increasing my appetite and increasing my hunger levels. So, sleep deprivation, definitely something that you've got to be aware of when it comes to your sugar regulation, because it will make you overconsume calories. The other thing is that when you are sleep deprived, you will have elevated levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines, and we know that inflammation can interfere with your body's ability to regulate sugar. Obviously, it has circadian disruption that can disrupt metabolic processes as well. And if there is excessive or insufficient sleep, that has been shown to impair glucose control in established type 2 diabetics as well. So this is why I ruthlessly prioritize my sleep. And I'm not just trying to get extra duration of sleep, I'm trying to get really good quality sleep. And these are the things that I always think about with regards to trying to get my sleep in order. Timing and regularity. Maintaining a consistent sleep schedule is key to ensuring that you're getting good quality sleep. Your body gets very habituated to a schedule. So if you're going to bed during the week, Monday to Friday, at 9:30 or 10 p.m., like I try to personally, I know that's quite early, but I do wake up early as well. And if I delay that or bring it forward at the weekends, I'm constantly changing my sleep schedule, and my body was always playing catch up. It's almost like I'm traveling in different time zones every single week. This is the way you need to think about it. Your body takes a few days to get into the sleep schedule. So if you maintain a consistent sleep schedule, that's going to ensure that your body clicks into gear, goes to sleep, and you get that good dose of quality sleep during the hours that you have set aside to rest. The other thing to get yourself into that routine is creating a relaxing and bedtime strategy, a routine essentially, whether that is reading, putting your electronics away, lavender on the pillows, dim lighting, whatever it is. Create that routine, just like I'm trying to do with my son right now. Get them into that sort of state where they recognize the signals, and your body is very simplistic. It recognizes those signals, and it knows it's time for sleep. For my son right now, and this is probably appropriate for adults, we're ensuring that the area is dim. He's had his bath. He has his feed. He gets a story. He gets a little skin-to-skin time. And then he goes and he hits the pillow, and hopefully he will stay down for 2-3 hours until he's hungry again. He's a 4-week-old, so hopefully that doesn't apply to you. But that relaxing bedtime routine is the signal to his brain it is sleepy time, and you can learn a lot from kids. Trust me. Duration, so you want to be looking for at least 7 hours, but everyone is different. And in the literature, 7 to 9 hours is what is deemed ideal, but that is so vague. It is, complete, almost 30% difference at the lowest and the highest end of that scale. So you really got to figure out exactly how much, how many hours per day is ideal for you. And the best way to do that is the next time you're on holiday, try and time when you go to sleep, ensuring that you're not having any alcohol, and wake up the next day without a sleep alarm. Try and figure out how long that was. Try that over a couple of days and see if there is a pattern. It could be 7 hours, could be 8 hours, and you will determine what is ideal for you. The more sort of data-driven approach of doing this is ensuring that you use a sleep tracker. Now, sleep tracking devices are not perfect, but they can recognize trends. And if the trend for you is that 8.5 hours is ideal according to the sleep waveforms that you've tracked over a few days, and it seems to be similarities. And again, in the same environment where you're not stressed and you're doing your sleep routine and you're not having to wake up for any reason, you're not using an alarm clock, that will give you an indication as to what an ideal sleep dose for you is unique to you. It is personalized to you. And so whether you want to use an Oura Ring or Whoop Ring or whatever sleep device it might be, or sleep tracking device, they're all pretty much the same. They all recognize the same signals. It is an idea to do that for a short period of time and then get an idea of what the ideal dose is for you. The other thing is to ensure that if you do have a sleep disorder, so something like obstructive sleep apnea, you get that treated. And there are many sleep clinics that you can get referred to via your GP if you suspect that you suffer from a sleep disturbance or sleep disorder. The other things I always say is ensure that your area, your sleep environment is cool, quiet, calm, so no arguments in the bedroom, and no social media in the bed, no work in the bedroom, and dark as well. So using sleep masks if you can, or blackout blinds. Cool, quiet, calm, dark, nice, relaxing bedtime routine, ensuring you have a consistent sleep schedule. This is a great dose of metabolic medicine. Your sleep is metabolic medicine. You've got to think about it in that respect. And any perturbations of that medicine is going to be detrimental to your ability to regulate sugar. So that's exercise, diet, sleep, stress. Now, stress alone does not cause diabetes, but there is some evidence that exposure to chronic psychological stress may increase the risk of type 2 diabetes and worsen your glycemic control, including your average levels of sugar, which are your HbA1c levels. And we're talking especially about stress building up over time, or if you face severe ongoing stress. Now, obviously life events occur and there's not much that you can do about that, but finding ways to lower stress day to day could have a positive impact on managing type 2 diabetes. And there are some things that I personally pay attention to, and I always advise patients to pay attention to. When you eat on the go, when you eat distracted, when you eat too late, this is a signal to your body that you are stressed. And it can lead to stress signals being generated. So before we even get into psychological strategies to mitigate stress, you've got to think about the physical things that you're doing that signal to your body that you are stressed as well. So please avoid eating on the go, avoid distractions in front of your phone or on your screens, avoid eating too late, and avoid eating too fast as well. This is a stressed state when you're eating, and your body will recognize that as a stressed state. The second thing is to take breaks as much as you can during the day. Now, I mentioned exercise snacks earlier, so making sure that you're not sitting down for too long a period during the day. Even a few minutes of walking or stretching can help manage stress levels and get your muscles moving as well. I always try and take a moment to do some deep breathing during the day, moments where I'm not on my phone, moments where I'm undistracted, and I just allow my mind to wander. Not only is that great physically for my body and moving my muscles and my mental health, but also from an ideas perspective, a creativity perspective, a mindfulness perspective. The sort of things that I've talked about on the podcast before when it comes to ensuring that you are leaning into boredom, because boredom is a very important part of being human. We are constantly being entertained and constantly seeking entertainment, but boredom is something that I think is very, very natural for us to enjoy, and something to really re-engage with in the future. In the same way, we also need to re-engage with hunger. It's no longer appropriate or sort of considered to be acceptable to be hungry anymore. We need to reestablish a positive relationship with hunger, and we need to establish a positive relationship with boredom as well. And the other thing is, if you are struggling with stress, therapy, talking with loved ones about it, being a lot more transparent, open. It's very easy to say this, but I think therapy and CBT and speaking to your practitioner is something that we should be encouraging as much as possible, because it's very hard, particularly if you find yourself getting into spirals of negative self-talk, to escape that spiral downwards of stress, and that can manifest in a number of different ways, both physically and also in the way we speak and we interact with people on our day-to-day, especially our loved ones as well. And I'm experiencing that because of sleep deprivation currently. That can also be another reason why we do experience stress. But on a serious note, CBT and therapy is definitely something that I would recommend. So my tips would be: slow down your eating time, fork down in between mouthfuls, create non-negotiable eating environments, so no screens, try and lean into deep breathing during the day, and try and recognize those stress signals as much as possible. Go for walks, stretch during the day. Micro-stretching has also been shown to help manage stress, and it gets your muscles moving as well. So you're getting a twofer instead of just a onefer. To exemplify what this buffet of lifestyle strategies are to help better manage blood sugar levels, to prevent type 2 diabetes, and even put it in remission, this is what I would think of in terms of 24 hours in a day. And to be respectful and to shout out some people who've already put this into action, like many of my patients, but also many people who are using the Doctor's Kitchen app and Doctor's Kitchen cookbooks have simply done the simple thing of removing processed foods, increase color, variety, a lot more plants into the diet, and put their type 2 diabetes into remission. These are the champions of this whole field. They are showing what is possible. They are brave enough to lean into these things. They are not reliant on medications. Not that that's a bad thing, but they are doing the best that they can within the confines of their day-to-day. And it is absolutely possible. And I see this every single day. So if I was to put this into a 24 hours of what this looks like, of leaning into exercise and diet and stress reduction and sleep hygiene, this is what I would recommend. So morning routine, get up, hydrate as soon as you wake, and try and fit in some light exercise, whether that's a walk outside, expose yourself to the bright lights of the morning. I know that's not the case during the winter months in many countries like the UK, but trying to get outside as much as possible and get some of that sunlight is a way to train your circadian rhythm as well and get your sleep hygiene in order. A few minutes of stretching, a short burst of activity. Maybe this is your resistance day. You like doing some bodyweight exercises, or maybe it's your HIIT day and you're doing jumping jacks for 1 minute on, 1 minute off, or squats, whatever it is, you're doing your exercise as soon as you've hydrated. Now, a lot of people like to eat before they exercise, so maybe you want to do this later on in the day. I personally exercise in a fasted state because I want to lean into getting it done right at the top of my day. It's the most convenient for me. And there is some evidence, not great, but some evidence that if you are training in a fasted state, you're more likely to dip into some of those fatty acid stores, deplete your glycogen stores. So you're using up all that glucose so your muscles can actually store more glucose from the day. And there are some potential performance benefits from that perspective as well. But each to their own. Some people prefer to exercise later in the day. But this is just one example of 24 hours in a day. Then it's breakfast time. Breakfast time is around 8:30 or 9 a.m. This is when your eating window starts. And if you want to have a black coffee in the morning, that's not going to disrupt your fasting window. We've talked about fasting sort of rules or routines in a separate podcast. But if you want to have black coffee in the morning, as long as you're hydrating appropriately with water, then that's what you want to be making sure you're doing first before you have your black coffee. But black coffee shouldn't disrupt your fast. Breakfast is going to include protein and fiber to keep your blood sugar nice and steady. Something like a tofu scramble, white beans, avocado, hard-boiled egg with some veggies. This is an ideal glucose-focused breakfast. That is going to put your metabolic health in the best stead. Work or do your daily activities whilst taking as many breaks as possible to move around, making sure you're doing your lunges every hour, making sure you're getting up from a seated position. Maybe you're doing some micro stretches. Maybe you're doing a few squats whilst you're taking a phone call, whatever it is. Make sure that you're getting your body moving as much as possible. If you want to have a snack, you probably won't feel like snacking because you've had a high protein, high fiber breakfast. But if you do want a snack, lean into the nuts and seeds. Go for a full-fat yogurt. We've talked about the benefits of fermented foods in the separate podcast, but these are the kind of snacks you want to be having: whole food, plant-focused snacks. Lunch is going to be something like maybe it's oily fish with side salad and some beans, a bowl of lentils. It does not have to be fancy. Just aim for a balanced meal with whole foods in it, making sure that you are removing ultra-processed foods as much as possible. No refined breads, no refined grains, no added sugars, no fruit juices, no sugar-sweetened beverages. You want to lean into the whole foods, of which there are plenty. And being prepared and maybe even meal prepping is one way in which to lean into that as well. Again, remember to lower stress by taking your breaks, micro-stretching, breathing, doing your deep breathing exercises. If you want to practice some of those breathing exercises, there are plenty of videos online in which you can try and do that whilst washing your hands or taking a walk out, staring into the distance and just being bored. This is all part of a mindfulness strategy that could actually improve your glucose regulating ability. Avoid snacks in the afternoon. And the way you avoid snacks in the afternoon is ensuring that you're getting enough protein and fiber at lunchtime as well. And lean into some of that hunger as well for an early dinner, because you're going to have an early dinner because you know that's not going to disrupt your sleep a little bit later on. And you are leaning into this time-restricted eating window, this time-restricted feeding window. and ensuring that you're not going to be over consuming calories outside of that window as well. Dinner is going to be an early dinner, 2 to 3 hours before bed, a light protein-rich option like a bean stew or a curry with roasted vegetables, a small amount of whole grains rather than rice or pasta, and you're going to be having no alcohol. I didn't actually mention that, but alcohol is very calorific and can be quite sugary as well, so you want to avoid alcohol as much as possible. And because you're eating 2 to 3 hours before bed, and because you're going to have a wind-down routine in a cool environment that's going to be dark, with blackout blinds or a sleep mask, and it's going to be nice and calm, you're going to fall asleep like an absolute baby. Maybe not like my baby, but definitely a baby that is well sleep trained. And that's going to be your dose of metabolic medicine overnight, because you're going to be having a quality sleep. So these are things that you've done, all the lifestyle things that I've talked about today, which are part of your metabolic medicine strategy. It is giving you your exercise medicine, your food as medicine, your stress relief as medicine, and your sleep as medicine as well. There are so many other supplements and other things that you can do as part of this, but those are the cherry on top. These are the mainstay. These are the big levers that can improve your chances at preventing type 2 diabetes and improve your management of type 2 diabetes to the point where you can even put it in remission and come off medications as well. If you want to look at some of the sources that we've used for today's podcast, please look on the Doctor's Kitchen website. Look at the Doctor's Kitchen app. We've done tons of recipes that really fit the criteria for not just metabolic medicine, but also other health goals as well. And we're really transparent about those studies that we've used. I really hope you've enjoyed this podcast and you share it with loved ones who you feel could benefit from this information. If there's anything I've missed, let me know on YouTube in the comments. That's where I'm going to be looking at the comments for this a lot more. And if you think that we should do this again through the lens of something slightly different, maybe another condition, maybe through supplements or some other lifestyle strategies that you think are just as important as the ones that I mentioned, let me know in the comments as well. I'd love to see those. If you love that episode, you'll love this episode that I've done on chocolate. I do a deep dive into the research behind why chocolate has benefits and how you can choose the best type of chocolate in supermarkets to have those healing properties.